Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to part 2 of the basic Unity 2D game. Now, last video we set up our scene, obviously with our objects that are gonna kill us, and the objects that we can collide with to let us not go outside the room, and also our player, as you can see here. Now, this episode we are going to set up the basics of our character movement, so making him move, left, and right. But obviously the way I'm going to set it out is that he will be constantly moving left, and then you're going to jump. He'll be constantly moving, the only thing you'll control is jump. But the reason I'm going to do this is because you'll be able to apply what I've told you on how to jump and actually apply it to anything. So we set a constant we set a constant movement to the right here. However, you would just change that, and instead of applying it to a constantly movement, you would just apply it for when you press a certain button on the keyboard, you would jump, or when you click, you would move to the right. So you would just take what I do to jump and apply it to whatever you want, which is why I'm only showing you the basics, because it's better if you were to try and create your own game using the knowledge you've already got, because then you'll learn a lot more and a lot faster. So let's stop muttering on and actually start doing something. So in our sets, as you can see, we've got a scene here. Now, if you wonder what level 1 means, it's just because I saved the scene. That's what that is. So that's just this scene here. So we're going to go in assets folder. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it scripts. And in scripts is where we're going to put our code, or our scripts that are going to do things. So we're going to right click, going to create a new JavaScript. Now we're going to call it I'll call it player movement. Now you could do this. You don't have to use JavaScript. I'm using JavaScript because I think it's easier for people to learn. It's easier to understand. But C# or or Boo. I don't even know what Boo is, but C#. You can apply what I tell you into C#, because Unity, the way Unity structures things, it's very easy to switch between. But anyway, I'm going to do in JavaScript. So yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, I strongly suggest you just follow what I do and apply the knowledge. So yeah, so we want to double click it, and we're going to open this up in it's going to open up in MonoDevelop. Eventually, when MonoDevelop wants to load, it takes its time. Does MonoDevelop? Any time of day. Jeez. Okay, so MonoDevelop is here. So we want to open MonoDevelop, we'll put it full screen because we don't need to worry too much about the game now. So this is going to get the default stuff. Now, function.start is basically where you put everything. This is just initializing, so it will only initialize whatever you could put. Let's say each time the level is loaded, you could spawn a player. That would be done initialize start, but it would only be done each time the level is loaded. That's it. Once it's loaded, that's it. Once it's started, it will never be started again until it's reloaded. Function update is what is applied every frame. So every frame it will update. So whatever's in this is what we need. So we don't actually need start, but we'll leave it there anyway, just because it's a lot easier for people to understand with it being there and with it not. So actually what we want to do is we're going to be focused on function update only, because in function update is where we're going to have our movement, where we're going to have our jump and our constant moving to the right. But before that we need to set some variables. Now to set variables in JavaScript, you just put the word var. There. Var, variable. So it's pretty straightforward. After you've put the word var to say that you want to put a variable, you have to put the variable name. So for this instance, we're going to call it jump height. Now after you declare the name, you can give it a value. So in our instance, we're going to give it 10. Now, do it again. Var is falling. And we'll put that equal to false. Now the reason we're going to put false is because this is what we're going to check to see whether the player is on the floor or in the air. If we didn't set this, you could just, every time you press space, you would just move up 10. So this is why we have false, so that we can check whether the player is colliding with an object, and if it is, then it's false. If it isn't, it's not. So once we've set them two variables, we can actually start moving on to the code. So in here, we will tab and do a comma, which is basically just 2 slashes, and we'll put ball, move, meant. Now we don't have to put ball, obviously. I personally just put ball because ever since I've coded, I've always done ball. But you could, you know, a cube, or even player movement. I guess we'll leave it a player, just so you guys understand. Now, on our player, we need to define some stuff. Before we do that, we have to actually head back into Unity, because we need to actually set some inspector stuff to our player. So you want to click on the player, and in the inspector tab, you're going to have to add a couple of components so that we can mess around with the actual physics part of Unity. So you want to go on to Physics 2D, and you want to add box collider, and also a rigid body. Now sometimes, for instance, you might have on your player a box collider like this, and when you go to add a rigid body 2D, it will tell you you can't because box collider is there. That's fine, just remove box collider because you don't actually need it. You want a box collider 2D, else it won't work, and then add a box collider 2D to that instance. So yeah. Now, once you've added box collider to your and rigid body 2D to your player, you want to add box collider also to the 2 floors that we have, but you want to make sure it's 2D. So if it says box collider, it's not right. Get rid of it and add a box collider 2D by going add component, physics 2D, box collider. The floor and other floor don't actually need a rigid body because we're not going to be moving them, so they don't actually need to have any physics. They're just going to stay there and have a collider. The collider just basically sets an outline that we can use in programming to access. Now, make sure that your player has the tag player, because in coding we're going to be referencing it. That's nothing really necessary at the moment. So, anyway, so now we've set our box collider and we've gave it a rigid body. We're able to mess around with the gravity scale. So, if you notice when we press play, oh well, sorry about that. When we press play, our player actually drops to the floor because it's got a gravity now of 1. Because we've given it a rigid body, so it's got a mass of 1 and a gravity scale of 1, and so it falls, and then it collides with the box collider that we've set. So yeah, once you've done that, we can actually go back to coding and do some cool stuff, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so open up your MonoDevelop again, and what we're going to do is we're going to set our jump speed by basically just by declaring an if statement. So if in put, if I can type, dot get key, another bracket, key code dot space, bracket, and then bracket, because as you can see, this bracket is defined to the first bracket, and then this bracket is defined to that bracket, so we have to close it with 2 brackets. So we're basically saying if the player presses the key code space, which is space on the keyboard, we want it to do the following commands. Now you need to set these brackets, I don't know what the fuck you call them, them weird curly brackets, I guess, because that's what defines what's inside of the if statement. And we want to put rigid body 2D dot velocity dot y equals jump height variable. Now, what we're defining here is the rigid body 2D that we just attached to our player. We are saying get the rigid body. So we're saying, right, take the rigid body and give it a velocity on the y-axis of 10, because jump height is 10. So we're saying get the rigid body, apply a velocity to it on the y-axis and give it the value of jump height, which equals 10. Now we can actually run this right now. So if you click, Control S to save, go back in Unity, and what you want to do is drag your player movement to player. So now when you go on player, you'll actually see in the inspector that you have your player movement, and you can actually define jump height. You can also define it as falling, but you don't need to worry about that. So what happens now is, because we've added the script to the player, when we set the rigid body here, it takes the rigid body of this particular player. So it goes rigid body, we're going to apply a velocity in the y-axis of the rigid body which is attached to player, which in turn moves player. So if we click play and press space, as you can see, we jump. But as you can see, we can keep jumping if we're touching the floor or not. And if I show you, just move that way, we could just, keep going forever until, yeah. So what we need to do is, obviously, we need to check if we're actually touching the floor now, because we do not want to keep jumping every time. So let's go back and monodevelop, and we need to set another function, because the function that we're going to set is going to check whether it's going to deal with our collisions for us, because Unity has a lot of stuff built in, a lot of things that you can call within functions that they've already set. So for instance, on collision stay 2D is set to check for collisions automatically. It's already done. So you call it in a function, and it will actually check whether there's two collisions happening. So underneath function update, we're going to write function on collision stay 2D. Now you've got to remember to put 2D on the end of it, because each time we put 2D, it basically, the way Unity's done it is everything we do here is exactly the same in Unity 3D, but without the 2D. So Unity is really good for, that's why I was saying earlier that you can actually switch between Unity 3D and Unity 2D, because they're very, very similar in the way that they deal with scripting. Now you want to add two brackets and then open it up with the calls the right way, Calvin, like so. Now remember earlier we set a variable called isFalling. We're actually going to check if it is, we're going to use that basically as our check. So in function we're going to put isFalling equals false. So if there's a collision between the player and the floor, isFalling obviously means false, because we're not falling, we are on the floor. And because of isFalling is false, and that's been checked by onCollisionStay, we can actually go up here in our brackets and put in and, which basically means and, is falling equals false. So now, when we, for the if statement to work, if we're able, the only way we can jump now is if the jump key is pressed, so if space is pressed and isFalling equals false, sorry, which is defined by this, then we will be able to jump. If not, then we can't. So no matter how many times we press space, if we're in the air, we can't jump. And the way we check, well, the way we say that we're in the air is underneath the brackets here, we just put isFalling equals true. Now this basically means that if we haven't collided with anything and we can't jump, then isFalling obviously equals true. We're in the air. So until we collide with something, it's always going to be true, in which case we are not allowed to jump. So Control S, save it, go back in Unity. Oh god, no. Now, for assistance as well, set script movement, found, expecting bracket found equals. What? Oh. So here's a good example. When you're checking if something equals, basically 1 equals is defining a value. 2 equals is checking for a value. So in this instance I forgot to check, because we're checking if it's falling equals false, rather than defining is falling equals false. You have to put 2 brackets. That's where we went wrong there. Sorry about that. Just problem on my end. So now when we press play and we fix that error, when we jump, we can only jump once. And to prove that, this way, we press space. And if you can hear my keyboard, we can't jump like we used to jump. We can only jump when we hit the floor. So remember when I talked about collisions, when the player hits this floor, the collision, Unity goes, okay, they've collided, and we've called the collision, so it goes, right, they've called the collision in a function, and they said is falling equals false. So when you jump, when I go back on thing, it then goes, okay, we haven't collided, so it's false. So it's true. We haven't collided, it's true, it's false. It's true, it's false. So as you can see now, we've got our jump moving, and the only thing left is to set our player speed to go right. So back into model develop, and underneath, now within function update, so just underneath is falling equals true, we could put another comma called player move right. And in here, we're just going to put 1 line of code, which is basically exactly the same as this, but changed, because we're going to set another variable called move speed. So, if we go up here, var move speed, then we'll put that equal to 8, I guess. I don't know. We can change it later on if we need to. That's it. And now, like it says, it goes rigid body. Every single frame, it's going to move rigid body. It's going to move the rigid body to do velocity of Y. Oh, wait a second. We might. No, yeah. Sorry. X. That's where I was going wrong. I was looking at it thinking, whoa, what the hell's wrong? No, but yeah. Because X, if you know, X is along this way and Y is up. X is all across and Y is up. So we're going to move the rigid body to D with the velocity. We're going to move the velocity of X with the value of the move speed, which is 8. So it's going to move 8 on the X-axis of the player every update. That's it. So, like I was saying earlier, you could change this by every time you press the right arrow by basically just taking this if statement here, minus the is falling, and change space to, right arrow, for instance. So, yeah. But we don't need to put an if statement because we just want it to constantly move. So, save that, go back into Unity, and hopefully, when we press play, yeah, we are moving quite fast. So we can actually change that here, the move speed, and make it set to like 3, because we're able to actually change the values of the scripts in the inspector tab, which is really cool. So that one is a little bit slower, but the problem is obviously we don't collide with these blocks here. Then we spin around aimlessly. So yeah, now we've got our player movement. I think we'll end it here and go to the next episode for the collisions of the spikes, because it'll be a lot easier for people to come back at if they ever need to. So hope this episode was fun and hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.